We've got two Bible readings today. The first one comes from Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. The second reading comes from Psalm 19, verses 1 to 6. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voices goes out into all the earth, their word to the end of the earth. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is deprived of its warmth.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Doing good? Okay, excellent. Okay, good. It's great to be back. I had 2 Sundays off. It was me and my family's turn to have COVID, and it was just a joy. No, it wasn't. My wife got it, and then, she's so good at sharing everything. She shared that as well, and I got it a week later. 3 or 4 days felt a bit rubbish, and then the rest of the isolation period, I was supremely bored. So it's great to be out of the house. Thank you for your prayers for Pip. She needed the prayers. Having me stuck at home is not a treat. So thank you for that. Feeling a lot better. Back at work, obviously back at church today, and feeling a lot better. Still a little bit weary, a bit tired. So that's my excuse if the sermon's a bit subpar this morning. Just wondering how long I can use that for, but we'll see. But it's really great to be back. Hey, happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there, particularly you young mums, first-time mums. I'm seeing a few first-time mums out there. It's fantastic. And particularly the mums with young kids. I hope you had your acting was on par this morning, especially with some of those presents. You know what I'm talking about? A necklace made of cereal. Thank you so much. You need to have your acting really kind of, so I hope that was on par for you this morning. Hey, we are starting a new series today. We were supposed to start last week, but I was at home. So now we've pushed it a week. We're starting a new series called A Better Story, as you can see on my left here on the board. In this series, myself and with the help of some great guest speakers, we're going to attempt to paint the true and beautiful picture of the Christian faith as the better story, the best story. Because the truth is, we all have a story. We all live by a story, if you have religious faith or not. We all have a framework through which we see and make sense of the world. We're all part of a story, constructed ourselves or borrowed. And the decisions we make reflect what we believe about that story. Let me ask you, what's yours? What story do you live by? And here really is the theme of this whole series, what I want to tackle. Is that story able to tackle life's big questions? Can your story bear the weight of life's big questions? Like, where do we come from? Where are we going? Is there any hope? What's wrong with the world? How do we explain suffering? How do we cope with suffering? How do we forgive? Does my work, does my 9 to 5 have meaning? And more questions we're going to be asking in this series. Can your story, the story you live by, answer those questions satisfactorily? Well, during this series, we're going to aim to be respectful of people who disagree with us. I hope that's the posture of this church all the time. We're going to be respectful of people that disagree with us while attempting to demonstrate that the Christian story has the most satisfying answers to these questions and more. Sound good? Good. Okay, good. Good so far. But, there's always a but. But before we get there, I think we're going to have to answer some questions, okay? Some common objections to the Christian faith. And a big one for this morning. I think we've got to do that. If we want to paint a picture of the Christian story being the best, the most beautiful, we probably should figure out if it's a fairy tale or not, right? Big one this morning. I think this is important before we move anywhere else. Hasn't science disproved God? I hear it all the time. Maybe you do as well. You've got friends, or maybe you yourself think this, or you've got friends that think this, family members think this. Hasn't science disproved God? I hear it all the time. I mean, come on. Having faith, having religious faith in God today, in this day and age, after all we know, after all science and technology has taught us, come on. Isn't it a bit foolish? Isn't it just a little bit childlike? Here's how the thinking goes. Science. It's based on truth, on evidence, while faith is based on hopeful thinking and legend. Right? Science is a search for objective evidence that leads humanity forward. Faith looks back to ancient teachings, outmoded holy books, and irrational conclusions in the face of overwhelming evidence otherwise. Right? Well, that's certainly what some people do believe. It's what I want to address this morning. Well-known atheist Steven Pinker says it like this. The findings of science imply that the belief systems of all the world's traditional religions and cultures are factually mistaken. Our good old mate Richard Dawkins agrees with him and says this. Richard Dawkins sees a universe that has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. I mean, come on. Previous cultures believed in God, but they were primitive, backward. We're past that now, right? We're past it. Surely no one having more than a primary school education could believe in God. Right? Sorry. Get my notes. Notice the recurring theme. Notice the recurring theme. Science is about thinking, evidence, and rational justification, while Christianity and religious faith are about evading evidence and clinging to non-rationality. Come on, we all know this. Science points to atheism, right? Science points to atheism. What if the pursuit of science led us toward faith instead of away from it? You heard me right. What if the pursuit of science led us toward faith instead of away from it? This might be a category shift for some of us here this morning, but I'm not alone in this, okay? What if the worlds of faith and reason were not opposed to each other at all, but actually belong together in a beautiful and life-changing symmetry that makes sense of the evidence even more than atheistic explanations do? Science lead to atheism? What if it actually led to faith? Would you be surprised by that? What if the widely believed claim that science is an enemy of faith was completely false? You interested? Yeah, I'm interested too. I've had a great week doing some research. Let me tell you, this is a huge topic. Okay? I'm not going to be saying everything there is on the subject. You don't want me to do that. All your mothers will be very disappointed because you won't make lunch today. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try in the next 20 minutes to really just kind of do one thing, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'm not going to be able to say everything. If you want to talk to me afterwards, there's so much more to say. I can point you to some fantastic resources out there. But here's what I want to suggest. What I want to suggest today is that belief in a rational God provides the first and best foundation for scientific enterprise, for scientific pursuit. That's what I'm going to attempt to make the case for. Today's a bit of a different message, a bit of a different preach a bit of a different sermon today. This is what we're going to be talking about. Hasn't science disproved God? Let's look at it together. Let's discover this together. You might be interested to learn that many of the early scientists were themselves Christians. I don't have time to give you the whole history of science, indeed, but this whole topic is huge. But I'll give you just a taste. In fact, science was first developed by two Christians, Roger Bacon and William Ockham, in the 13th and 14th centuries. They were monks who laid the empirical and methodological foundations for the scientific method. A century later, another Christian, another man called Bacon, weirdly enough, Francis Bacon, made it very well known and popularized scientific empirical method. Here's the thing, historic Christianity prized the life of the mind. Now, what did Jesus teach? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your... No, you're supposed to close your mind. No, with all your mind. Right? Medieval monasteries were the centers of academic study, right? They were founded to train priests, and most of the very well-known, famous universities that we know of, Harvard, Princeton, and so forth, started out like this, started by Christians, the pursuit of knowledge. Historic Christianity was all about it. Hang on, though. Hang on. I know that science is opposed to religion. It just is. Where did you get that idea from? Princeton professor Hans Halvorson, what a very cool name, says this: the first scientists believed our universe was designed and created by God according to a blueprint that can be discerned by rational creatures like ourselves. Since God was free to create however he chose, the only way to discover the blueprint of creation is by means of empirical investigation. So rather than empirical science being opposed to faith, they're aligned. Christians believe in a rational creator, don't we? Right? Daniel read so well for us from Genesis and from Psalm 19. You read the Genesis creation accounts, what do we get? A God of order and design, which is at the heart of our world and our universe. Major themes in the Bible. And it's because of this that we can undertake a scientific approach to the world. It lines up with our worldview rather than against it. Why should we suppose it? We don't, and here's something crazy, we never have. Oh no, hang on a second. No, I'm sure this is wrong, right? The church historically has been against science. I'm really confident of this. Let me ask, how do you know that? How do you know? What led you to believe that? Oh no, come on. Science makes a discovery, moves us forward. The church reacts and retreats, right? I mean, come on, there are examples. Galileo and Copernicus. They're examples. Galileo, you guys know this, in the 17th century taught the earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around, against widely held belief. And he was tortured and damned and killed by the church, right? I tell you what, there are lots and lots of people, lots of scientists that believe that is true, right? They cite this as a reason, Galileo's torture at the hands of the church, cite that as a reason for their continued belief that science is opposed to faith. But guess what? It's a myth. It's a myth. Right? There's lots to say on the topic. It's a bit nuanced, so I'm not going to be able to say everything. But basically, Galileo himself was a Christian. He argued that the sun being at the center of, they said, universe, they meant solar system, rather than the earth, doesn't undermine the Bible. The reason for the fallout between him and the Pope had far more to do with relationship and political reasons. He wasn't tortured, no skerrick of evidence for that. He did go under house arrest for a little while in a palace. Sounds pretty good to me. Even though there was a fallout, it was very small in the scheme of things. No historical evidence for him being tortured for his scientific discovery. None. And afterwards, he continued his scientific research, which was supported by the church. Get this. I didn't know this. I've been doing research this week. This is a big claim. There is no other example in history of the Catholic Church condemning a scientific theory. What? How does that sit with you? I was kind of astounded to think this. I mean, yes, you might be surprised. We all have this kind of underlying conception that the church has been against scientific discoveries, scientific theory. We just do, but it's a myth. Historian David Lindbergh, speaking about the medieval era wherein the supposed persecutions of science took place, writes this: "There was no warfare between science and the church." Wow. Historians agree the science versus religion story is a 19th century fabrication. Now, if you want to learn more about this, John Dixon's got a great podcast called Undeceptions. He's got a good episode called Science Wars. And the reason we kind of have this myth around today is because of two quite famous books written by two people in the 19th century that made up a lot of stuff, which has now been debunked. But still we kind of believe this science versus faith lie. I think it's also probably come from, I mean, let's be honest with ourselves, like movies, TV shows, period dramas, where the church is just painted as anti-ideas and anti-science. Could Dan Brown have been wrong? Could Netflix be wrong? Say it ain't so. It be so. John Lennox, Maddie, we're going to cue that video in a second. John Lennox, who's a professor of mathematics and a philosopher of science at Oxford, so far more qualified to talk about this kind of thing than me, he says this in an interview film for the Alpha course, just a 1-minute video. Let's play it. Let's hear what he has to say. Thanks, Maddie.
There's a widespread impression in the public that science and God don't mix. And that's curious, because if you think of the rise of science in the 16th and 17th centuries, all its pioneers believed in God. In fact, they were Christian in some sense or other. You talk about Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and so on. Kepler famously said, "We're thinking God's thoughts after him." So far from their belief in God hindering their science, it was the very motive that drove it. Because they believed in a creator, a rational spirit behind the universe, they thought that science was worth doing, and so they did it. So I'm not remotely embarrassed at saying I'm both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject. We study God's revelation both in the natural world and in Scripture with the minds that God has given us. And I believe there's no conflict ultimately between those two sides properly understood.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie. Let me get the lights back on. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Dr. John Lennox. If you want to Google him, he's got just incredible resources around this whole science versus faith debate, which doesn't really exist. Okay, so many of the early and more modern scientists were Christians and had absolutely no trouble reconciling their Christian faith with the process of empirical science. But hang on, you're going too fast. What about more recently? I've heard lots of people say recent discoveries and theories, like Big Bang Theory, evolutionary theory, genetics, they've been used as tools to demolish faith, right? I mean, come on. Again, I would ask, how did you come to that conclusion? Let's take Big Bang Theory for an example. As an example, I don't have time to go through them all. This is a very well-known theory. I'm sure you guys know it. First proposed by a Catholic priest, and then developed by others when they observed the universe with powerful telescopes was still expanding at a crazy rate. Okay? All the research points towards our universe having a beginning. In the early days of this research, some scientists, particularly atheist scientists, hated it. They hated it. Why? Because it kind of seems to give credit to the Christian view of our universe having a start time. Stephen Hawking, very well-known atheist, says this: many people do not like the idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. There were, therefore, a number of attempts to avoid the conclusion that there had been a Big Bang. This theory, Big Bang Theory, pretty much widely accepted now in the scientific community, that the universe had a beginning. Now, I don't know about you, let me assume this of us. We want to be rational, reasonable people, don't we? We do. Following where the evidence leads us, right? In this theory, it leads us to believe something outside of time and matter caused the beginning of our universe. What was it? We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. Let me talk for 30 seconds about evolutionary theory. There's so much to say, okay? What about evolution? Well, Darwin himself went from being a deist to an agnostic, but his greatest collaborator and best advocate was a guy by the name of Asa Gray. He was a passionate Christian. Darwin loved this man, and they worked very closely together. He looked at evolutionary research that they were doing and concluded, this is a quote, that nature was filled with unmistakable and irresistible indications of design. He tried to persuade Darwin to return to Christianity. You can read their letters. They had over 300 letters between them. He tried to persuade Darwin to come back to Christianity, arguing, this is a quote, God himself is the very last irreducible causal factor and hence the source of all evolutionary change. Again, so much more to say on these topics. Just given a taste this morning. Friends, where is the knockdown argument? Where is the knockdown argument that science has disproved God? It doesn't exist. Early, modern, current scientists gladly hold Christian faith and the pursuit of science together. Even recent theories, rather than point to atheism, point to the possibility of God. So why this widely held false belief? Why? I think it's got more to do with our preconceptions. Can we talk about that for a minute? There's lots of reasons why people don't believe. Not all of them are rational. They are social, emotional reasons often. Right? It's got more to do with our preconceptions. I think we've got to be honest with ourselves with where our beliefs come from. Harvard biologist Richard Lewontin admitted in an article that he and the scientists he worked with, they prefer naturalistic and atheistic explanations for everything they study. That's not a surprise. But what he said next is kind of interesting. He said this. Sorry for all the quotes. He said, the reasons we prefer such explanations is because the scientific community have a prior commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori, that's our first preference, adherence to material causes. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. At least he's honest, right? Pretty staggering statement. I love his honesty, though. What drives his science? It's not science. It's philosophy, metaphysical reasons, right? His faith position determines his science. This is how so many of us live without thinking about it. Okay, I'm going to say a statement that I know people are going to hate, so this is good. You might wake up. Here we go. Everyone has faith. Everyone. I don't care if you're a religious person or a secular person, everyone has faith. Oh, no, Dave, that's where you're wrong. Science is the realm of the rational. Faith, that's blind faith, taking a leap of faith in the dark. You have faith, we have reason, right? Is that true? Let's talk about that for a minute. Everyone has faith. Everyone, even the most convinced atheist, secular person, has a faith position. How? Everyone believes in something, right? And makes assumptions about reality that cannot be proven even through science. You think about what it means to prove something with science. No, I don't have faith in anything. I'm not so sure a person who says that is being honest with themselves. See, everything we believe is filtered through a grid, like I said before, a worldview, how we make sense of the world. And come on, let's be honest, many of those things are faith-based conclusions rather than beliefs adopted through empirical proof. Can I give you an example? Please do. I could give you lots, but let me just give you one. I read about a nurse who was a Christian, right, and who worked with doctors that were really, really adamant the hospital was purely a secular place. No room for faith here. No room for faith in the medical community. This particular group of doctors, right? One night, her and the doctors, the staff, the team, were discussing a patient who was on life support. What were they to do? Leave them on or take them off? Really hard decision for people in our medical community to make. Tough. One doctor said, well, at least we know if we take him off life support that he won't be suffering anymore. And everyone in the circle nodded in agreement. Now the nurse went away, didn't say anything at the time, and went away and wondered to herself, how do you know that? How do you know that? See, that statement, it's not a scientific statement, it's a metaphysical statement. How do you know? It's not empirically provable. They believed, all of them, that turning off the life support would mean this person wouldn't be suffering anymore. But based on what evidence? You know, I went to a friend's book launch a little while ago. He's going to be preaching next week in our great series. And he wrote a book. He was one of the authors that contributed to a book a bit like our series, actually. You know, different people, a Muslim, an atheist, and a Jewish person, answering life's biggest questions. And they had a book launch, and the MC, who you would know the name of, a celebrity atheist, unfortunately kind of just took over the whole night. It was pretty interesting. Anyway, at one point in the evening, he stood up and yelled at my friend. He said, you know what? There is not one bit of proof for your God. And then he had some faithful atheist people, you know, clapping in the audience. One was sitting right next to me. We had some lovely discussions. And there is not one bit of proof for your God. Now, being generous, right? Let me interpret what that person said. I think what he meant, what he said was there's not one bit of evidence. He said there's not one bit of evidence for your God. Being generous, I think he meant proof. Right? This is the point I'm trying to make. There's not one bit of proof for your God, and he's absolutely right. You can't prove it. Don't you think it would have been done by now? You can't prove that there is a God. Christians cannot prove there is a God. Skeptic folks cannot prove there is not a God. So where do we go from there? We use our reason. We use evidence. And I would say we also use faith. Both sides use reason, faith, and evidence. What kind of evidence? What kind of evidence? Well, I don't want to talk for too much longer. But let me just talk a little bit more about the evidence for God. I want to talk about the soul and the stars. I want to talk about the soul and the stars. This is an ancient argument. How do you and I give an account for morality or our soul? How do we do that? We all have these rights and wrongs, don't we? That we hold to and expect others to hold to. Where did that come from? Where did it come from? I was watching, I think 2 weeks ago, a special 60 Minutes report, a news report. The reporter was in the Ukraine, right? Reporting on the war in Ukraine, very bravely walking down a war-torn street, bodies strewn about the place. It was full on, right? Full-on images, you know them. And he said, what's going on here, right to the camera, the war crimes, the killing of civilians is evil. Now, truth is, I'd say almost everybody, we've got no problem believing that, do we? What is happening there is evil. Based on what? You see, a secular worldview cannot give us categories of good and evil. Deifying science, deifying evolutionary theory, like as in that's what I believe in, it cannot give us categories of morality. It cannot give us good and evil. In particular, evolution, if we go there, that's what I believe in, that's my worldview, it leaves us with some pretty yuck consequences, right? The moral implications are scary. Even Dawkins says he's anti-Darwin when it comes to the question of morality. So where do they come from? Evolution does not validate the liberal secular humanism preferred by new atheist leaders, right? If evolution is our only story, we get rid of God, it's evolution, it means we have no grounds for insisting on human equality, protection for the weak, equal treatment of women. What Putin is doing right now in Ukraine It's the natural playing out of evolutionary theory. It's the strong eating the weak, right? It does not mean that if you believe in that, you are an evil person. Far from it. Of course not. There's plenty of good people who are not Christians. You don't have to be Christian in order to be good. That's rubbish. But where do our morals come from? Where do they lead us? Where is the evidence taking us? That's what we're looking at today. One Stanford neuroscientist says this: do we live in a universe where our highest values and intuitions about ethical behavior are in touch with the central reality of the universe and the reason the universe was built from the beginning? Or are our highest values and ethical intuitions kind of a joke, an accident, that really have nothing to do with what the universe is about? Truth is, we hate injustice, don't we? And we've got no problem believing evil is wrong and calling it out. Here's why. Because the central reality of our universe is God, who is righteous. And there is a moral law that's imprinted on our hearts because we are made in his image. It is ingrained into us. Okay, we're going to look at this soul and the stars. We looked at the moral argument. Where is the evidence pointing? Let's look at the stars. As we've already seen, Big Bang Theory argues for a divine cause, I would say, or at least a cause outside of time and matter. If it's not God, what is it? You know what the secular answer is? The atheist answer? Get ready for it. Nothing. That's the answer. Nothing. Nothing caused it. And again, I'm not criticizing anything. I'm asking you, are you satisfied with that? Nothing is a good explanation for nothing, right? Son, what happened to the car? Nothing. What did you write on the wall? I had this experience this week. What did you write on the wall? Nothing, right? Why would your teacher be calling me to have a conversation? No reason, nothing. Nothing is a good reason, explanation for nothing. You can believe that nothing started the universe, that's fine. But is that the most rational explanation? Where does the evidence point? That's what I'm asking. Where does the evidence point? Let's think about the design of the universe for a minute, okay? The incredible complexity and infinite creativity. Theologians and scientists call this the fine-tuning of the universe. And almost, I don't have time to go through it with you now, but I tell you what, an almost infinite amount of things had to be exactly right in order for all we see to come into being. By chance, by accident, you can believe that if you want to. That's fine. Where's the evidence leading us? I find it hard to believe. All by chance? You walk past a beautiful house, you have no problem believing that a talented architect and a skilled builder made it, don't you? Why should it be any different with our created world? This is a quote from our friend John Lennox. Again, I love it. We only have to see a few letters of the alphabet spelling our name in the sand to recognize at once the work of an intelligent agent. You walk along the beach and you see Pip loves Dave and you don't go, wow, that must have just happened. Someone wrote it. Come on, let's use the minds that God has given us. Someone wrote it. How much more likely, then, is the existence of an intelligent creator behind human DNA? The colossal biological database that contains no fewer than 3.5 billion letters, the longest word yet discovered. I read that an amoeba, which is a single-celled organism, is that right? You're sort of saying, yeah, just nod with me. Okay, good. There's enough code written into that to fill 30 encyclopedias. Single-celled organism. No. By chance, accident. Sure, you can believe that, but where is the evidence leading? It could have happened by chance. Okay, let's go with that chance argument for a moment. Imagine you're playing poker. Your pastor is asking you to imagine gambling. The chances of you being dealt a royal flush, the first deal, are incredibly, incredibly low. Right? But imagine that happened 2 or 3 times. Everyone around the table would think you're cheating, yes? The chances for our universe to happen by chance, you would have to be dealt a royal flush forever. And even those odds are absolutely nothing close to what it would look like for our world to happen by accident. Imagine an aeroplane hangar filled with all the parts that it would take to assemble an aeroplane. Imagine a tornado going through that airplane hangar. After the tornado is finished, you look back, and there's a fully assembled 747 jet. I'm telling you, the chances of that happening are far more likely than our world, our universe, being exactly right. I'm asking you to look where the evidence lies. Where is the evidence pointing to us? The evidence, I would say, leads to a designer. Now, let me tell you, I'm not anti-science. I love it. I am so grateful for it. I am so grateful for science. I'm so grateful for the science of modern medicine. I am alive a few times over because of science. I rely on a machine to keep me alive minute by minute as a diabetic. I love it. It's great. Science tells us amazing things about our world, amazing things about our bodies. But ultimately, how much can science tell us? You see, science ultimately cannot give us meaning. This is why it's fantastic for answering some questions and totally hopeless at answering others it was never meant to answer. Not very good at answering the questions, why? Science tells you about wonderful things about your body, but ultimately it says you're a bag of cells and waste. That's all it can say. It's all it's qualified to say. Can't give you meaning. Is that all we are? I am dissatisfied with that, and maybe you should be too. See, I'm grateful for scientific knowledge, but I tell you what, is it the most important that there is? If God were real, what would he say about us? I'll finish in a minute. See, the Bible says you were fearfully and wonderfully made. That you weren't an accident. You were made by a loving God. That yes, you are dust, and to dust you will return, but you were made for a purpose. You were made to relate to the one who created you. You were made to be part of a better story, and that story has love at its very center. Friends, science and faith, they're not enemies. They go hand in hand. Hopefully I've gone a little way to prove that today. Now I realize just because you can be a scientist and a Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Fully aware of that. That was not the purpose of today's message. Come back next week. Come back next week. Come back the week after. As in this series, we look at the viability of the Christian faith. Science, faith, they're not enemies. They're friends. And hopefully maybe I've just cracked open the door of possibility if you're a skeptical person. If you got questions, all I can say is fantastic, seek answers. You can be satisfied with the answers that the Christian faith provides. Come on back next week, particularly as we look at what is so unique about the Christian faith. I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks for listening. Bit of a different message today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to sing to close our service. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for giving us so much. Thank you for giving us minds that can explore the natural world that we do believe you've created. Father, if there's anyone here who's skeptical, I'm so thankful that they're here. They've chosen to give up their Sunday morning to be here in the presence of us. I ask that we could politely have debate, politely use our minds to come to rational, evidence-based conclusions. We thank you for this community that is open to anyone. Thank you for the Alpha course starting tomorrow. I pray, Lord, that it'll be filled with people who want to discuss the big, wonderful questions in life. We love you, Jesus. We thank you again for all you give us. Amen.